Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Mobby Nazir and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at We Are Social. And I'm joined today by Charlie Cottrell, who's our Head of Editorial. Charlie, do you want to say hello?
Hi there.
And we're going to be taking you through today our report that we published this week called Do the Right Thing, which is our perspective and point of view on how brands can navigate social in this period that we find ourselves of crisis and of COVID-19. For those of you who don't know, we're a socially led creative agency. We are in 15 markets around the world. And we've really tapped into our global network to put this report together. And it's been very useful because we've got offices in China and Italy who are obviously slightly ahead of the rest of the world in terms of the process that we're going through. And the insights from those markets have been really helpful in putting this report together. What we wanted to do in putting this together was provide a really practical guide for clients and brands in terms of navigating this crisis in social. It's been based on the work that we're doing with our clients at the moment. And so I think it's a really good and useful how-to of what to do now, but also how to plan for the future as well. There's going to be some time for Q&A at the end, so please do check out the Q&A box, which is on the bottom right-hand corner of your screens, and add in any questions that you have as we go along. We'll try and answer a couple of them at the end. We are going to also share the deck via email after the presentation, so all of you who are on today or have registered for this event will receive a copy of the presentation as well. So, jumping into it. We're navigating this crisis in real time. It's at an unprecedented scale. I thought this quote that I saw last week was really interesting, that, more people are now on lockdown than were actually alive during World War II. So, this is really big. It's affecting all of us all around the world. And what we're finding is that people are reaching out through social media for help and guidance, for ideas, distraction and comfort in this time. And as I say, we've been monitoring the impact of COVID-19 and the role that social media can play across the world through our global network, tapping into our offices like China and Italy, but all of our offices really, from the US to the UK to the, all the markets that we have in Europe as well, and in Asia Pacific. And what we're seeing is that social has a really significant role to play in helping brands stay relevant and present in the life of their consumers. We're going to divide the presentation today up into 5 sections. The first is talking about the community, that your community is online, and the fact that they actually need brands at this time. So we're going to talk about why that is and how brands can play a role. We also have a section called Hit Reset, which is really sort of a quick start checklist of things that brands can do now. It's hard sometimes to think about what's the right thing to do, and should I do something and how should I do it? So we've got a really quick and handy sort of 11 points of things that you can consider doing right now. The third section is how to navigate the crisis. So we're looking at how the crisis is going to be unfolding. There are 5 clear stages of this process that audiences and brands are going to go through. And we think there's an opportunity for roles at each stage. So we're going to be outlining that in a bit more detail. And then the fourth section is getting much more practical, and how do you get your content right? So, how do you create content? How do you work with influencers? How do you engage your communities without appearing opportunistic? Some really practical guidance in that section. And then finally, we're going to be looking at what's next. The situation is changing really fast. It's changing every hour, every day, and how can brands stay on top of all of this? So we've got some handy resources to help you, post this presentation as well. So starting off with the first section, your community needs you. And this is really talking about the shift that we're seeing in the role of social media back to its kind of original goal, which was to be a community building platform. It's interesting that last year there was so much noise around deleting Facebook. There was so much anti-social media sentiment. And now we're seeing that people are really, using these platforms for what they were originally designed to do, which is connect people and build relationships. And what we're seeing is that this crisis is really engaging community. It's strengthening those communities that already existed, and it's creating new ones where they're needed as well. And this sort of balcony example is a really nice example of that from Barcelona, of people going out on their balconies and playing music and connecting with each other. And, this sort of behavior is not just specific to COVID-19. It's a behavior that we've seen in disasters and crises before. And this quote is a really nice one that we found from a report looking at the impact of disasters on mental health. And this report is actually from 1996, and it was looking at the impact of the world wars and of natural disasters on community behavior. And what they said was that it's an obvious but often overlooked fact that a disaster creates a new community of sufferers. And we're certainly seeing that at the moment. So as I said, your community needs you. Communities need brands at the moment. What we're seeing is that people are spending more time online, and they actually have very new and different needs now than they did a few weeks ago. And communities are developing around those needs. Some of those are new needs and some of them are temporary. But what is clear is that now that we're in isolation, more than ever, what matters is community. And so the opportunity here is for brands to think about their content strategies in this new environment and how they can be more human at this time. But it's not just communities that need brands. Brands also need their communities at this time more than ever. We don't know how long this crisis is going to last, and some brands have been more affected than others in terms of their revenues and their ability to operate. But what we do know is critical is that brands that stay engaged with their audiences during this period will come back stronger. So continuing to engage with your community during a recession can be a way to soften and shorten the impact of that recession and sort of reduce the depth of it, and also shorten the duration of that as well. And on top of that, the opportunity here is to actually focus on your core customers and your communities. And this is a great quote here on the slide from Bain around the power of consumer loyalty in a downturn. And they say that when spending drops, companies focused on protecting and growing their most loyal, profitable customer segments can often stabilize their businesses. And they may even attract new customers as competitors falter. So, this is a time that brands need their communities as much as communities need brands. So what have we been seeing coming from community conversations and conversations online and social media? There's sort of 5 key takeouts that we have from the pandemic so far. The first is that we're seeing new and sometimes temporary communities forming in social media in response to these specific real-life needs that people have. So the opportunity here is for brands to research their communities and find the right opportunity to engage and to add value. The second is that attitudes to advertising are polarized, but globally, only 28% of consumers are opposed to brands advertising at this time. So that's data that was based on GWI research from sort of wave 3 of their research. But actually, more recent data shows that number is declining even further. So the opportunity here is to adjust your paid media strategy and to focus on emerging community needs and not to be afraid of continuing to advertise and engage at this time, so long as it's done in a sensitive and careful way. The third opportunity is that media spend is dropping, but demand for content is up. As I said, people are turning to social channels, they're spending more time there, now they're in isolation, and we're seeing engagement with organic content is increasing. And people are hungry for immediacy and authenticity. So this is an opportunity to revisit your always-on content strategy, which many brands sort of put to one side in recent times in favor of more campaign-based approaches to social media. The fourth opportunity is that we're seeing communities embracing new and emerging platforms like TikTok, live streaming, AR, VR, platforms like Zoom, out of a need to feel connected. So the opportunity here is for brands to experiment with these emerging technologies and platforms. And the fifth sort of insight we have is that we're seeing that influencers are at the real forefront of creating content in this time. They're engaging with their audience and have been engaging with their audience, for weeks. They're actively out there sort of speaking to their communities and saying, is it okay if we continue to post the same kind of content we were posting before the crisis? What kind of new content do you need from us? They're testing that real time. And so there's an opportunity for brands to collaborate with influencers to produce content and to, tap into those insights and to help scale their activities.
So when we move into this kind of more practical way of working, we really see there are three key things that we need to do to get this right. We need to be listening. Once we've listened, we need to act, and then we need to monitor the impact of our actions and also what's going on in the world around. Listening is really critical to help you get a real-time read on what it is that the community that you want to help needs. It can help you work out what's going on in your category, what's going on with your customer base, what's going on with your brand. And also it can help to flag any emerging trends or issues that you might need to deal with or amplify. If you've got an online community that you've been building for some time, you really need to tune into what they're saying. So look at those conversations that are happening, use social listening tools to help you work out not just what is the general need, but is there a specific need that there's a place for you to fulfill. If you don't have your own community within social, then you're going to need to look to wider conversations to find a community that you can contribute to. And again, this is a point where influencers can be really helpful, partly to be access into communities that you can support, but also to be a kind of trusted voice in that space. Once your listening has helped you identify, actually, is there something that I can do? Then it's a time for action. And what we've seen here is segmenting your brand by category doesn't necessarily make the most sense here to determine what the role is. So it might be that lateral thinking is required to determine the community that you can best serve and how you can help them. So we had a few examples here of how brands have done things outside of their category space. So I think the kind of famous Kickstarter example that went around a lot was the hand wash being made by Louis Vuitton, and then into Burberry picking up making stuff for the NHS, garments for the NHS, all the way through into sports grounds, giving up their space for hospitals. And then Deliveroo in the UK here added some functionality to its delivery service app, which meant that people could pay for meals for NHS workers. So across the scale, from physical to technical, there's lots of different ways where brands are stepping outside of their category to find their role. Then monitoring is really essential. So as Mobby said, these developments are happening almost in real time. And it's really essential that you keep taking the temperature of the community to understand how your actions are being interpreted. So there are a couple of examples here where it was really critical to act quickly after something had gone maybe not down as smoothly with the community as expected. So here in the UK, a brewery called Brewdog made some hand sanitizer right at the beginning of the crisis here, which was essential. But because they're quite a fun brand, people in their community immediately assumed that this was a sales gimmick rather than a free product that was being done out of a charitable gesture. And there was initially a backlash here that the brand had to step in and clarify. And then they had another comms hurdle when it seemed like it wasn't up to scratch, and actually that wasn't true either. So they needed to be making sure that what they were doing was going down well. And McDonald's had a similar thing in the States where they posted a message of solidarity, but actually it just opened a whole different conversation that they didn't want to have about how they treated their workers with sick pay. So you may need to stop or clarify your message. You actually may have a great response that you want to amplify further. So monitoring is essential. There is a real sense here, and I guess everywhere, that when you feel a bit helpless, you want to do something. And from looking at our network and from listening to what consumers are saying about what they're looking to, people in their community, including brands in that community, there really is a role to play. So I think there's the opportunity now to work with our brands, work with our clients, and think, what is our role to play? It can be hard to know, and I know there are lots of conversations happening that seem a bit sprawling. Some people want to do nothing, some people want to do lots of things. And so we created this list, which is born out of conversations we're having with brands, things that other offices have observed and have folded into their content strategies. This is a quick reset to help you have conversations if you're not really sure where to go next. There are 11 points on this checklist to work through, and they take you through that listen, act, and monitor framework. So all the way through to listening to what your community is talking about. If you've got a good set of community managers, making sure that they're feeding back to you the kind of conversations that they're seeing. And one thing that we've noticed, even in the writing of this report, is that those conversations can iterate quite quickly. So within 1 week, within the parenting community, there's been a shift in conversation from saying, what do I do with my children now that they're all off school, to there's so many activities that are being posted online for the children. How do I select one that doesn't require me to be sitting with them the whole time so I can get on with the work? So those conversations are really shifting, and to find the right valuable space, you might need to keep an updated ear out. Then we look at things like setting up a daily newsroom. So just starting the day with a 10-minute review of what's happened in the news, what conversations are going on. Does that give you an opportunity? Does that mean you have to step back? Making sure that you're connecting in the right way, finding those influencer connections to help you build trusted connections into communities. And then all the way through into things like reviewing your tone of voice. It can be a really important step to look at how you're speaking to people, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be very serious and somber. So understand what is the right kind of tone. Making a content plan so you're knowing, one, how do you benefit from organic content being back, but also are you getting the right frequency so you're not just becoming more noise. And then even things like, it's okay to take a step back. So if there's a lot of noise going on and you don't have something to add, maybe the part that you play at this point is to do nothing. But whatever happens, we need to adapt fast. You need to be set up to be able to respond in the right way to the situation as it continues to change.
So moving on to how do we navigate the crisis? So how do we act in the short term, but make sure we're planning for the long term? Well, we think what's really useful here is this framework of the 3 stages of the pandemic that was created by Canvas 8. And it actually reflects the 5 stages that, we go through in any disaster or any sort of time of great loss. And it's divided up into these stages of denial, anxiety, adjustment, reevaluation, and then post-crisis when we get to the new normal. And there are different needs at each of these stages that if brands can understand, they can really sort of think about how they can be relevant to their audiences and their communities. And going back to the report that we referenced earlier, what we're seeing, during these sorts of crises, both now and in the past, is that in the aftermath of a disaster, what we're seeing is many of the essential human needs that are missing in everyday life fulfilled during these times. So this great example here of this gentleman who hit his 101st birthday, which was cancelled because of the impact of coronavirus. And he went online and, he was able to get lots of support and lots of engagement. What we're seeing here is these are behaviours and things that we should have been doing outside of this crisis or outside of this disaster, taking care of our elderly, supporting people who are, in support roles, and celebrating and recognizing them. So what we see during these sorts of times is these sorts of needs are missing in everyday life actually coming to the forefront. So as I say, communities have got clear needs at each of these stages, and understanding these helps us to sort of guide what we can be doing in social during these different stages as well. So the first stage, which is denial, which, arguably we are sort of getting through, but in some ways we're not. So we kind of, come back to sort of waves of denial and waves of sort of thinking, oh, maybe I can go out now. And the need here from the community is authority and direction. And the opportunity for brands is to be, a responsible voice and to intervene. The next stage is anxiety. And the community need here is clarity and security. And the opportunity for brands is to provide generosity and solidarity, showing that brands understand what people are feeling at this time, helping them mobilize resources and energy to deal with their new needs and their new concerns. And then sort of moving out of anxiety, we get to the adjustment period where we start to realize that, this is not a short-term thing, that these are situations we're going to have to live with for a bit longer than we thought. And the societal response here is to police behaviour and to, mitigate fallout from policing those behaviours. But the community need is for support and entertainment. And so the brand opportunity is to innovate and adapt and help people to stay entertained and to stay supported during this time. And after adjustment, we get to a sort of re-evaluation phase where we're sort of thinking about what are the longer term measures that we now need to apply to sort of survive longer term. And this is a time for communities of reflection and recovery. And the opportunity for brands is to provide hope and regeneration. And then finally, we get to post-crisis, which is the new normal, where we're going to need to think about how we're going to assimilate the new behaviours with our old behaviours. Now, interestingly enough, if you think about a market like China, which is now sort of out of lockdown and back to work, they're still really in the adjustment phase. They're not actually post-crisis. And so I think the time that we're going to take to go through these stages is longer than we might initially anticipate. So how do you determine your role at each of these stages? Well, we've got this sort of flow chart that we're using with clients, which we found quite helpful, and it's aligned against that model of listen, act, and monitor that Charlie spoke about earlier. And the first stage is listening. So, do you know what your community needs are? And as Charlie mentioned, those needs are changing very rapidly from one week to the next. So constantly listening to monitor and understand them is really important. And then it's about thinking about, are we the first brand to address these needs? And if we're not, then do you understand how competitors have set new community benchmarks and expectations for how those needs are going to be met? There are a lot of brands that are active in this space already. So if there are other people out there doing things that are great, then you really need to be thinking about, can your product or service meet or exceed the need, and meet or exceed the benchmark that's already been set? And then if you can, great, continue. But if you can't, then the recommendation is you should stop, but continue to monitor community needs to see if new ones are emerging that you can help with. And if you are going to go ahead, then you need to think about how you're going to bring it to life in your social channels. You need to have a clear creative and editorial approach that thinks about the short but also the long term. And then obviously you activate. And then finally, as we said at the start, you need to continue to monitor. So how is your activation landing with people? Is it being understood in the right way? Has it been misinterpreted in ways that you didn't anticipate? Do you need to course correct? And also continue monitoring not just what you've done, but as we said, any new or emerging needs that are coming out throughout this process. Okay, so what we're going to go through next is stage by stage, looking at what are the community needs, brands that are doing things well, and then content opportunities at each stage. So for the first stage, as I said, was denial, where communities are really looking and need authoritative direction, and messaging needs to be clear, singular, and consistent. So for example, hashtag stay home, save lives. So there's a role here for brands to intervene and take a responsible lead.
And so when we're looking at people who have done work well in this space, the really good call out was when Instagram released its stay at home sticker in multiple languages. And this was effective because it allowed people to reinforce the message peer to peer, which is obviously an incredibly powerful way of spreading an idea. Then in the US, the banana brand Chiquita removed its Miss Chiquita from their logo, which is a very gentle, not particularly expensive to produce piece of content, but actually very effective because it reinforces message. Something so iconic was self-isolating at home. Across the world, we saw that mobile phone operators, including Vodafone and Orange, were using the brand space that they would ordinarily have on customers' phones to insert, instead of their brand name, that stay home message. So really reinforcing in a very physical place that is checked many times a day, this overall stay home message. In terms of the role for content, so what we can do here is look at where can we creatively amplify these civic campaign messages in order to speak to our communities in the right way. So the stuff that we know about the people that we create for that really helps us get that extra hook for this civic message. Those might be things like adapting your creative to reflect life at home. So here you're looking at not showing social gatherings, but instead showing stay at home messages, folding that key message into end lines. In the Nike example, this is a great way of showing how if you understand the emotion that your community comes to you for, so for a sport, you've got here like team spirit and pride, appealing to that emotion really lets somebody feel like they're part of the solution, they're helping with along with you. And then in the Jameson examples, so Jameson whiskey used St. Patrick's Day as a way to talk about, normally we'd be out celebrating together, probably in pubs and bars, but now we're staying home. So how can you use calendar moments as opportunities both to anchor the message, but also to reinforce it?
So the next stage is anxiety. And as I said, this is where communities are feeling very sort of helpless and stressed out and looking for organizations to help mobilize efforts to support them. And a great example of this was the video that went viral in the UK from nurse Dawn Bilborough and her sort of tearful plea to people to not stockpile when they're going shopping, and really expressing the extraordinary pressures that essential workers are under. The opportunity here for brands is to show solidarity and generosity with communities and to think about being generous with assets to help people maintain some degree of normality at this time. And a great quote from the study that we've been using during this report really talks about how people are very open to making massive changes at this time. So the quote is, "Disaster provides a societal shock which disrupts habitual institutionalized patterns of behavior and renders people amenable to social and personal change." And we've seen that, examples such as supermarkets prioritizing the elderly and vulnerable at certain times of the day. So they're the only people who will be able to access the shops at that time. And people are very happy to go along with that. They're very happy to change their normal routines and their normal habits, during this specific time period.
We saw some really great examples of people stepping up with their brands to really show that generosity in this period. In the UK, Deliveroo and Uber, food delivery services, both pledged free rides and food for NHS workers. And Deliveroo added this fundraising functionality within the app to help people within the broader community support those NHS workers as well by donating meals to them. In Italy, when Burger King had to shut down all its restaurants, it gave away its food to charities and NGOs. And in China, when a cosmetics company had to shut down all of its stores, instead of laying off its staff, it retrained them and redeployed them as online influencers. So really great, thoughtful ways of understanding different kinds of communities' needs and responding to them. In terms of content here, it's great to make big gestures in real life, but actually we've got to think about what can you replicate in social and what can you keep on doing. And listening really gives us that insight here. So one of the things we've observed is that lots of new audiences are coming to different platforms and using technologies differently. So lots of businesses have had to translate their ways of working online. Slack has become very important, but loads of people don't know how to use Slack. So think about how you can support audiences who are new to technologies with how-to content. And that might be your technology, but it also might be a technology that you use. So Lululemon in the US released lots of exercise videos across the week, but tons of people didn't know how to use the platform they were going on to, which was Instagram Live. So they had to create how-to content there. So listen to your audiences there. Other ways you can facilitate human connection. So Chipotle gave away food, but also hosted these virtual lunch parties with celebrities to encourage people to stay in together, but remotely. And then think about embracing the new platforms available, but if your communities are forming there. So don't just try to think, what is my TikTok response? But if, like the World Health Organization, you realize a community you're trying to reach is forming on a certain platform, then yes, go to TikTok and work out what to do with them there.
The next stage is adjustment. And we actually think this stage offers the most opportunities for brand participation. This is a time when, people are in quarantine, they're having to adjust to a new sort of routine. They're sort of facing boredom. They need support. They need entertainment. And so there's a real opportunity here for brands to play a role through content and adapting their products and services to the specific needs of communities at this time.
So we've seen a lot of people doing some great stuff here and really pulling on lots of different important levers that are necessary to their communities. In France, fashion brand Cézanne partnered with Marie Robert of Philosophy is Sexy, and they gave away free philosophy lessons via Instagram Live. So a way for people to kind of come through with this process having learned something and culturally enriched their lives. In China, there is an online retailer called Tmall, and every year they have a massive festival of shopping, which is offline. So a real world experience where people come and interact with brands, which then had to move online. And so what happened here was brands like Calvin Klein used live video and AR and VR to really engage their shoppers. So they created really visceral experiences using technology to make an online experience more tangible. There's also ways that brands can look at the platforms they have and use those in constructive ways. So in the UK, LinkedIn has given a platform to an influencer activist called Mother Pucker, who is very active looking at employee rights, especially working mothers. And so this is a time where lots of people's ways of working are changing dramatically. And so LinkedIn offering that platform was a great opportunity for that influencer to reach a whole new community of people who are looking for ways to be supported in their new way of working. If you don't have content, how can you produce something and keep that community conversation going? And actually the US in the Getty Museum in LA had a great example of this. So they've been throwing out a UGC contest to people who follow them on Twitter and Instagram and asking people to go to the Getty Museum website, find a piece of art and then recreate it in their home using 3 things they found around the house. So it's a really brilliant way of getting people to engage with your content, but also make something and be entertained in the same way. In Spain, we saw a great response to the issue of live sporting events being shut down. So when La Liga football match was cancelled in real life, a player from each team came together on FIFA and played it on FIFA 20, and it was watched by 60,000 people on Twitch. It's a brilliant understanding of what people are missing, finding a smart and creative response to giving them something in return, and then taking it onto a new platform. And in Australia, Every year, Bud Light does a dive bar tour, which is like taking a really massive artist to lots of small bars. Again, this is something that had to move online. And so this year's partner was Jake Owen, and he has been streaming gigs from his home on Instagram Live. So keeping that opportunity live and actually making it something more intimate. In terms for the role of content here, so what we think that social can do that's really worth looking into is looking at what are the creative tools that are already built into these social networks that help you keep your brand spirit or your brand product alive in a way that is entertaining or useful or supportive or informative. So live streaming has been massive. We don't think it's going to go away, actually. And so if we think about what can you use live streaming for with content that is lighthearted or inspiring or skill building, and then working with influencers to help you understand and support the specific needs of the communities that would enjoy that content. And then how can you use technology to facilitate virtual experiences? So what is it that you can do with AR and VR technology to make the intangible tangible?
Okay, so moving on to stage 4, which is the re-evaluation stage. And this is when restrictions start to ease and communities are going to start to experience a period of reflection and recovery. What we've seen from our conversations with our colleagues in China is that the return to normal is not going to be rapid. It's going to be very gradual. Even though people are able to go back to work, people are still not socializing. They're not going to the cinema and they're not going to the theatre. They're not going to the supermarket or going any further than they really need to. And so this is going to have an impact on how quickly brands can return to business as usual. So the opportunity here for brands is to really sort of spread a message of hope and to support the message of regeneration of communities online, because that's really what people are going to be looking for at this time is content that helps them look forward to a time when things will be different.
So here we looked at examples from China and Italy about how brands are responding well to this situation. One of the things that was really interesting in that when speaking to our colleagues in China was this idea that even though people can leave their house, they want to do that as little as possible for as little time as possible so that they still feel safe. And so immediacy and accuracy of information is really critical. The first example here is from an app called Baidu app, which works similarly to Google Maps. And what this does is help people to understand which stores and services near them are open and what their opening hours are, in case those hours are restricted from what they would normally be. And so not only does this help the community go back out and feel secure, but it also helps those shops and services to recover too, because they need their customer base to be visiting them in order to get back on their feet. So up-to-date information seems like a simple response, but actually incredibly effective. The second example is a collaboration between sportswear brand Fila and a video creator who's well known for creating a very popular piece of film content online. And so what this did that was spectacular was it took somebody who's very high profile and created a film that was all based in UGC. The director collected 193 video clips from 193 couples and used it to make this uplifting film, which is all about meeting up with your loved ones in person. And so very heartfelt, very of the moment. And in Italy, Pirelli, who are an iconic Italian brand, their tyre manufacturer, their whole business is around hitting the road and being out there and driving, which of course no one can do. And so their film is a very pretty, very beautifully designed piece that simply has this one message of hope saying, when all of this is over, we will hit the road again together. So uplifting, inspiring messages that encourage you to go back outside, but also understand, have a real empathy about how that's going to be a gradual process. The role for content here, it kind of echoes in a lot of ways the first stage. So in terms of it's going to be really critical to be empathetic. So we know people are going to be anxious about returning to social situations. It's important that you then communicate how will you support your customers and how will you support your staff in order to facilitate this return to normal. Be helpful. So what utility can you offer to help people readjust and encourage them to start using services again? And to be optimistic. So it's very likely there'll be a second spike of fear as people start returning to the outside world. So communities will benefit from a message of hope. What we've not said here, the role for content is absolutely not around like there's going to be a massive party and everybody go back out. And so I think if we were listening to conversations in the UK, certainly it seems like all of us now are talking about that. There's loads of memes going around about how everyone can't wait to like get their post-quarantine outfit ready. And the likelihood is that isn't going to be the case from what we've seen. So if your planning comes around the big get-together, you might want to shift the perspective and think about these 3 points about empathy, helpfulness, and optimism.
Okay, and then moving to the final stage, the new normal, which is post-crisis. And this is where we're going to see brands and communities needing to assimilate their new behaviours with their old behaviours. It's difficult to sort of predict what's going to happen at this stage, but what we are seeing is things like, massive digital transformation of businesses and change that in the past would have taken months, if not years to happen, happening in sort of days and weeks. And so that's one of the sort of quite interesting things that we're seeing that are going to come out for this 5th stage. So how do brands start to plan for that 5th stage? It's quite easy to get caught up in reacting to the current situation of the crisis that you find yourselves in. But it is important to start thinking about potential future outcomes. And we can learn a lot from previous historical global crises. One thing we do know for sure is that the consumer landscape will be very different in the future. And so here's some thought starters that we're using with our clients that are useful kind of discussion points. So what could be the new and lasting innovations that you might expect in your marketplace? The example we shared earlier of the brand in China, the cosmetics brand, training up their staff to be online influencers. That isn't something that needs to stop post-crisis. That is something that can continue. How will new community groups form during the crisis and potentially the greater integration of society that we're seeing at the moment change how you understand and connect with your audience? How can you prepare for the new values and norms that are emerging from this period as people are reassessing what matters in life? And how can you align your products and services to that? And finally, which of these new behaviours that have emerged during the crisis do you think will persist post-crisis? So all useful and big questions that we can be asking ourselves to prepare for coming out of this process.
The final section around content is looking at much more tactical ways that you can think about how to create and distribute content over this whole stage of this crisis. We looked at what our clients were talking to us about here, and we wanted to answer some very specific questions around what to do and how to do it in the right way. And one of the main ones here was, how do we avoid looking opportunistic? The question was asked, do we go dark? Do we stop posting? And the response there is no. And this is looking at all evidence from previous crises, not just this pandemic, saying that brands that go dark find it much harder to recover. And actually, we're listening to communities and they're telling us there is a role for brands to play. They're not adverse to advertising. I think when we wrote this report, it was something like 23% of people, only 23% of people felt that there wasn't a space to advertising, and that's dropped. So, people are happy to hear from brands in a commercial sense as well as in a community sense. Do we mention COVID-19? So yes, it's useful to allude to the situation. People who have not made any reference to the pandemic are coming across as tone deaf, and that's actually having a negative response in terms of how people are viewing the brand. But you don't want to specifically call out the reason why it's a great opportunity to try your product or brand because of the pandemic. So, for example, you shouldn't say, if you're on lockdown, why not try this product? You might want to say, if you're looking for something to do, why not try this thing? Can we still run paid media? So here the guidance that we're saying is, don't be afraid of paid media, but do be mindful of how you use it, and avoid opportunistic targeting and opportunistic kind of calls to action. But do make sure that your calls to action are relevant to non-physical actions. So make sure you're driving people to sign up online or register for callbacks rather than come into stores. And then the last point here is, there are new channels that may offer more cost-effective media, so it might be worth you looking at those too. A question that we've been asked is, there's so much going on, where do I even start with planning content? We've seen that there are 6 key content territories that are emerging as significant. They're across the top of this grid. So they're connection and community, productivity and continuity, knowledge and learning, exercise and well-being, entertainment, inspiration and projects. And then mapped on the left-hand side, are these different roles to brands that we identified at each stage using that Canvas 8 model. So it's a useful tool, this grid, to tactically plot the needs against the brand responses. And that can really help you identify the sort of content that you should produce and start as a kind of creative Kickstarter for ideas and ideation. So, just looking at an example here, if you move across from innovation and entertainment, then you can see how Tmall arrived at this very innovative way of helping people sample brands and try on clothes by using AR and VR. If you look at generosity and entertainment, you can see how in that earlier stage, Chipotle brought celebrities and products together to create those virtual lunchtimes. So it's a good tool to use.
So looking at how influencers can play a role in helping you create content during this time, as we said, they are active and are helping their communities at every stage of this process already. We've seen in the UAE influencers clubbing together to make #AbidingNation the #1 trending hashtag in that market. In the US, we've seen the gaming collective FaZe Clan launch weekly global gaming tournaments to raise money for those affected by COVID-19. In Canada, we've seen Club Quarantine bringing offline club culture online, creating a safe space for the LGBTQ+ community to hang out. And then sort of moving into adjustment, we're seeing in the UK, people like Joe Wicks and the Body Coach streaming live daily exercise sessions on YouTube, helping families at home with kids. And we're also seeing, again in the UK, influencers supporting parents struggling with homeschooling and creators offering daily classes via Instagram Live. So, these guys are already out there creating amazing content at each of the stages of this process. And the opportunity is for brands to sort of collaborate with them. So how should brands work with influencers? We've been interviewing influencers from, for a number of different markets, from UK, China, Italy, and these are sort of the insights that we're seeing. Firstly, people are looking for live content. They're looking for intimacy with real people and real personalities. But live isn't a format that all brands are familiar with working with. So working with influencers is a great way to experiment with that format and drive scale for what you're doing at the same time. The second insight is that since this crisis has started to unfold, most influencers have been engaging regularly with their communities via Q&As, live messages. So they're an amazing source of real-time insight into what audiences really want at this point and are going to want in the future as well. The third is that influencers have already adapted to their content to the current situation. So there's an opportunity for brands to pay attention to what they're doing and to offer support or sponsorship of that content. The fourth opportunity is that actually a lot of influencers have had to diversify themselves beyond their usual content pillars. So for example, if you're a travel influencer, you obviously can't travel at the moment. So, they've diversified into other areas. It could be food content, for example, that they can prepare from home. So it's an opportunity for brands to learn from this and maybe work, with a broader roster of influencers than they have done in the past. The fifth opportunity is, given how quickly the situation is changing, influencers having to adapt their branded content quite rapidly. So, the need here is to be very collaborative in your briefings with influencers, and make sure it's a two-way process. A sort of blanket email out to them is not really going to get you the kind of content that you need. It needs to be much more of an iterative process to ensure that what you get is going to work in such a sensitive landscape. And finally, creators have got a lot more time on their hands than usual. They're at home, but they're very creative and they're thinking of, new ways to work with their audiences all the time. So there's an opportunity for brands to use this time and creators' creativity to think bigger than just single post placements and, think of bigger social and creative ideas that you could work on together.
The big question is, how do we produce creative when we can't go out and do shoots? And here, this slide wants to be really encouraging that actually there are a lot of ways that we can still make work. And if we think creatively, we can get to really great solutions. UGC is going to be a really obvious thing to lean on. So not only does this give you great content with a good brief, but also it engages the community in the project with you and makes it more likely to land. There are things to explore within design, within sound, AR and VR, so animation, podcasts, audio clips, typography, motion graphics, building AR and VR experiences from quite lo-fi in terms of just sound, all the way up to building immersive shopping centres. There's a real scale here to be looked at. You can think about creators who have home studios. So there are lots of videographers and photographers at home with home studios. With the right creative brief, they can still be creating stuff with your product. And then don't forget about the archive of work you already have. So you might have videos, you might have images, you might have partnerships, you might have things in text that you can reproduce in animation. Find new ways to repackage the assets you already have into new content series. Community management is going to be a big deal for a lot of people, and certainly for a lot of the clients that we've been speaking to. It's more important than ever to keep your customers and communities engaged. So here, this slide talks about some ways that you can think about that, again, following that listen, act and monitor model. So upweight community management time. So let them have access to social listening tools and also understand they are your front line, so they can help you understand opportunities, protect your brand, but also support your customer service channels, which for a lot of clients are being overwhelmed now. People have lots of questions. Make sure that everybody in your community management team are aware of what your tone of voice is at this point, and also that they're feeding back to you what kind of FAQs are coming back up, because if you're seeing a lot of the same questions coming through, you might want to create content around that you can point people toward. That is again going to take some of the stress and the burden off your customer service team, and have an escalation plan in place so that the situation is changing quickly, and if you do spot something that you need to respond to, that your community managers are familiar with what they need to do in terms of developments to escalate the situation. So we've taken you through quite a lot of different points at different stages, but like within that listen category, what we're thinking is communities are telling us they need brands right now, so there is a role for brands to play. But it's important that through listening, you define the right role for you at each stage of the pandemic, and that you keep looking at the fact that this pandemic is changing, so it is likely that the role will change. That it's important to upweight community management to support your consumers and your customer service. And there's an opportunity to create always-on content to stay relevant and top of mind in a way that is affordable and relevant. That we need to be innovative with creative, both in terms of what we're doing and how we're producing it, and that working with influencers is a real opportunity to land your message with authenticity within communities. And then finally, that setting up brand trackers and listening to conversations in communities can help you monitor the response and how your actions are going down.
Okay, so what next? As I said, the situation is evolving really rapidly. And so we have some resources ongoing to help brands keep pace with what's going on. we have a weekly new content series called the In Lockdown content series, examining how COVID-19 is impacting different industry sectors. So you can think of this report as a broad view of what's happening in the marketplace at the moment. And then the In Lockdown series is looking at specific industry sectors. So far we've published In Lockdown, A World Without Sports, looking at the impact of COVID on the sports industry. And then we've also published In Lockdown, The Show Must Go On, which is looking at the impact of this crisis on the entertainment industry. We've also published, I think this week, an article on dating. We're looking at the self-employed and the gig economy. And we have in the pipeline analysis coming out on FMCG and food, alcohol, technology and communications. So do subscribe to our blog to be kept up to date on those research findings ongoing. You can obviously also contact your local office for any sort of specific help that you need or any questions that you have coming out of this report. So that's the end of the presentation for today. We do have a few minutes for some questions. So let's just take a couple of those, Charlie, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
The first one was, let's have a look. So how can a brand in a struggling industry, so for example, travel, remain relevant while they can't promote anything to do with their industry whilst working with little to no budget?
So we saw a lot of people talking about this, and also there's a real practical situation for the travel industry. And one of the things that we've observed from looking at who's doing this well was that there's an opportunity to look at not just the journey, but also what people are missing from the experience of travel. So we've seen there was a travel influencer who has diverted their conversations and pivoted to talk about food. So people can't go to this country, but actually how can they experience it in different ways? So I think here, this is a great example of how content can help you understand what people are missing in the experience of the service, and then try and recreate that in some ways. You're looking here at keeping the conversation alive, finding opportunities to be present, but also empathizing with the situation people are going on. So, and it might even be that this is an opportunity to go into that archive. So if you can't go to a place, how can you see it or feel it or experience it? Kind of keep people's dreams of travel alive. If you can keep present, then you're more likely to be the travel company that people remember when the restrictions are limited and they can go again.
Yeah, I've seen some really interesting stuff of how people are trying to recreate their travel experience without actually being able to travel. So, for example, people buying like puzzles of the place that they were planning to go to as a way of sort of experiencing that place. So I think there are ways that travel companies can remain engaged during this time and help people sort of, I suppose, look forward to when they can travel again. So the next question that we can tackle is about how do sort of clients, so yes, it was generally sort of saying that a lot of the examples we've shared have been about free things that brands can do to be helpful and useful during this time, but how can brands drive revenue? How can they drive sales and profit in this period where we're looking at discount offers and layoffs are happening and extreme financial loss?
So I think a couple of things here are that we've seen from very lo-fi to very high end responses about how people are driving sales. So that Tmall example, that was driving revenue. That was helping people to try on virtually products, be in a virtual space with people they used to be in a mall with, and actually drive sales. There's going to be that need for shopping as entertainment, but the thing is, how do you make that experience as visceral and as real as possible? Another example is ASOS in the UK, where because they can't do fashion shoots, they were sending product out and allowing people to become the models. So they were using influencers as models, and they would do their own makeup, do their own hair, show the clothing. And again, actually, that created a really real situation, because these were other people who are in the same experience as you, who still enjoy the things that they love. They still enjoy fashion, they still enjoy beauty. and that's driving real revenue. You can shop through these platforms. There's an experience there. And then the other thing was, that's very big companies, but very small companies are seeing that their consumer base are keen to support them, and that people with all sorts of industry, from food to fashion to flowers, are moving their stores online and being really honest and transparent with their communities, saying, please help us. So either buy stuff from our online store or buy vouchers for in the future when we are open, that just help tide them over. And it's getting that transparency and that honesty is driving a really good response from people who do want to support small communities. So small enterprises. So from small to big, there are ways to drive tangible sale through social.
Okay, and we'll tackle one last question in the time that we have, which was, so as an entertainment company, how can you stand out with all of the live streamings that are going on, and all the entertainment companies that are jumping on this and doing the same? And is monetization of live streams working in places like China?
Here I'd say this is about your community. So what you've got as an entertainment brand is access to assets, whether that is creative assets or people. And you've also got probably great conversations going on around the assets that you have. So the better tuned in you can be to the conversations around your titles or your brand, the better able you will be to find that very specific conversational point that allows you then to create content off the back of it. So don't be general, be specific would be the guidance here. Listen, really listen, get your community managers listening, look at tools that can help you understand where the conversations are, because you're going to want to get into the specifics of a community and the niche of the community to help you find traction in the noise.
Yeah, and I would say that the monetization of it really, I think it depends on the time that you're at in this whole period. There's a time when you need to be offering these services for free. In the UK, for example, the National Theatre, the Globe Theatre, they're all live streaming their productions at the moment for free. There will be a time when it's appropriate to monetize that. That's probably not now, but that is something that you just, I think you need to gauge market by market and industry by industry, really, and audience by audience as well. Okay, so those are all the questions that we're going to get time to tackle today. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate the time you spent with us. As I said, we're going to share out this copy of this presentation to everybody who's registered to the event, so look out for that. If you do have any other questions that you want to follow up with us, please do reach out to us directly. Our contact details are in the presentation. But yes, I hope all of you remain well, and thank you again.